Well, hey, howdy everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. I'm Katie. I'm joined by John. How's it
Hello.
going? We
It
do
was
the
like so anti-TV. Like as soon as it came on, I was like scratching my nose. I'm like, oh, that's it. I'm not getting on CNN this week. This is not happening.
Ugh. So last week, John and I talked about sales strategies for sponsorships. And John, towards the end of the episode, you said, I wish we had more time to actually get into the sales, analytics and the sales piece of it. And I was like, great, that's part two. So here we are, 1 week later, part two, talking about analytics for sales, what separates your early customers from the mass market, the importance of an accurate ideal customer profile and how to build one, and what's the most common pitch mistake and how to avoid it. These are all things that, I know I need to get better about. I am maybe the world's worst person to put together a pitch. I'm like, hey, you want to buy it? And they're like, hey, no, block, spam.
That's you are, with 98% of the world. That's how most people sell. And yeah, there's a bunch of stuff we can dig into with it.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, John is our illustrious business partner. He is the head of business development. We like to call him the chief statistician because he is the only one of us who actually passed a stats class, ironically. But so John, where in this conversation would you like to start?
Yeah, the big thing with this is, with last week, what we did, I was just kind of taking for granted that people had a lot of the foundational stuff about sales. And then as I stopped and realized, I was like, well, there's actually a whole ton of stuff. Like if you haven't managed sales and gone through that whole, realm of hell, then it's better if you can get a little bit more of an overview as far as, okay, here's how all this stuff fits together, because ICP fits into it. There's lead qualification, and then there's even, the whole process and CRM side of it, and all the way to psychology of what you talked about. Like that's just the classic pitch is somebody comes in and like, hey, this is the thing. And that's actually backwards. Like that usually gets you in trouble. And so we can talk about how all that works. I think a good place to start is to talk about the spectrum of sales, because it's very different depending on what the product is and how people buy. And the easy way to think about it is at one end of the spectrum, you've got basically me getting water at my house, right? Like if I want the utility hooked up, how do I buy that? Well, it's a monopoly. Nobody cares. I don't have any other choices. So that becomes, it's really just a customer service function. There's really no sales happening there whatsoever, right? The only sales that comes into a situation like that is it is in everybody's best interest for it to be frictionless, for me to be, to get started immediately and start paying today and kind of get everything out of it. And so you see there's a whole realm of products that are over there in that branch. Online courses, stuff you buy on Amazon. And a lot of people talk, frankly, about race to the bottom. Those things are all a race to the bottom. It's who can do it cheaper, who can do it faster. And profitability is always a problem with those things, because it's just there's no value there. Everybody is beating every nickel of value out of that. And even, once people start competing on price, it just gets worse. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum would be something like pitching your business to a venture capitalist. You basically have nothing. There is no product. There is no value. It's nothing but a story. And you need to sell this story to someone to get them on board and, get them to jump in and work with your product and throw you some money. So that's the spectrum. And the techniques change and pivot in different directions. They basically kind of become opposites as you move along that whole band. But I guess we should stop there and make sure we're good with that. I mean, does that all make sense? Are there any questions as far as laying that out?
No, it makes sense. So it sounds like you're saying at one end of the spectrum, there's things that we as humans and as consumers just organically need, and they kind of sell themselves, like water, utilities. Every once in a while I'll see these posts on Instagram of people, satirically saying like, I don't know why cheese companies have marketing departments and sales departments. I'm going to buy cheese. You don't need to remind me, because, and it's like, it's one of those things that like the product sells itself. There's, certain necessities that, like toothpaste and toothbrushes. Sure, there's like competitors of like who has the best one. But at the end of the day, like it's the thing we need. So we're going to buy something. Whereas, to your point, sort of if I'm understanding the other side of the spectrum is the stuff that like you really have to work hard to convince people that they want to pay attention to. And that's where a lot of us, I feel like, are stuck. We think we have the necessities and the things that people need, but really these are all luxuries that, we've created as companies. And we're like, no, but it's a necessity. And they're like, I don't really need that marketing mix model. It's a nice to have. So our job becomes exponentially harder because we then have to say, no, you really, really need it. It's going to be life changing. Here's why. And now can I have a bag of money, please?
Yeah, that's the pitch. It's a lot of that, all that stuff is product market fit, right? And that's really in the realm of marketing, which is why we end up talking about this stuff and why there's so much overlap. Is if you can get something that is just plainly obvious to the prospect or the customer that they need that, then the sale happens, right? You don't need to get involved. And there's been this massive transfer over the past 2 decades, which we're not going to dive into entirely, but basically the fact that in the old days, the seller had all the buyer information. They had the power in the relationship for making the sale happen. It was, there used to be a time when if you wanted to buy a computer, you had to go talk to a specific person and get pricing. Like you couldn't get pricing anywhere else. And that's been completely destroyed now. Everything is shared on the internet. Everybody knows, what everything costs and all that stuff. So a huge chunk of sales has been eaten by marketing because you can do product market fit with your marketing. Marketing will get the ideal customer profile. They can figure out who's got budget, authority, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of it has shifted away from that hands-on sales guy, the guy with the polyester blazer trying to make things happen. That's kind of dried up. And that is another too. I wanted to take an aside on that one too, just to lay down. If you deal with sales and you're working with sales, one of the most important things is Glengarry Glen Ross, the David Mamet play, which was made into a movie. There are so many tropes and memes about that movie that if you're going to hang out with salespeople, it's a good idea to get familiar with that, just so you know some of the jokes in there, because otherwise stuff will be going. People will talk about ABC always be closing, right? Like that comes up over and over again. And yeah, and it's just funny because that movie does show the full spectrum of kind of sales attitudes and how people work. And each one of those people is a trope. There's the guy begging for the business. There's the guy who's the mystic, who's preaching, who's, gathering the converted, the cult leader. And those are all different approaches that work. But yeah, thanks. I wanted to make sure we laid that out there too, because that's part of understanding, kind of how this goes, especially at that far end of the spectrum, the VC pitching the vision. That's a whole different thing and another set of challenges. So that's one place to start. Another thing to define too, to get straight with this, we talk about BANT, B-A-N-T, for lead qualification. So BANT is budget, authority, need, and timeline. Those are the 3 things that have to be there for it. Depending on how your CRM system is set up, a lot of people set that up as like, that's the definition of a lead. Like you don't commit to, hey, we've got a shot at getting this money until all of those are there. And the thing is nowadays, when you look at that more closely, so you've got budget, do they have the cash? Do they have the free money? Because like right now we're in a down cycle in MarTech where people just don't even have the money. They're laying off people. So they're not going to buy your stuff. Like that's just not even going to happen. So you're automatically lost there. Authority is, there's a difference between the person who has authority and the champion. The person that has the authority is the one who can sign the contract and actually make the transaction happen. And a lot of times you won't deal with those. In larger orgs and B2B sales, there's whole realms of gatekeepers who are, you have to get through them to get access to the person that has the authority to sign the deal. And so many deals in our space for us get killed by somebody's inquiring, they chew up a bunch of time, they make it sound like they have the authority. And then when the contract comes out, oh, well, actually, I need a VP or somebody else to get this. And and VP is like the classic misnomer too. We've had, there's one that we will not name the guilty, but there have been more than one VP where, you deal with them for 6 months to get through their purchasing process. And you find out that that's just the crazy VP over in the corner that everybody ignores. And yeah, now you're approved to be a vendor, but nobody's ever going to listen to this guy. So you're never going to sell anything. So those are from hell. Need is the one that you do have control over, right? That's the product market fit, is what you're selling, what they need. And so that's critical. And timeline is the last one. There's a lot of people who shop, but if they don't have a critical timeline item, if there's not, something's going to happen if they don't do it by X date, then you can be caught in this thing where you're just going to talk to somebody forever and they're never going to do anything. And so when you step back and look at that, from a more Zen approach, you really only have control of one of the four. You only control 25% of your destiny. Like, you can put the best product you've got out there, and everything else is just, okay, do the people coming to you have the ability to make the deal happen? And there's a lot of stuff, and this is where we kind of get into ideal customer profile, right? Because that is critical, because that gets into need, it gets into product market fit. It helps you kind of dial in on that, but it also does help you dial in on the other three, as far as, okay, these types of people tend to have budget and they tend to have the authority. And so you can increase your odds over there.
Well, before we get into the ideal customer profile, I want to go back to something you started talking about when you were identifying, BANT, the BANT, and that a lot of sales teams and CRMs, unless you have those boxes checked, they're not a lead. I've seen a lot of misunderstanding of what a lead actually is. And so I want to, talk about that for a minute, because I feel like there's people who misunderstand, like, if somebody signs up for the Trust Insights newsletter, Inbox Insights, that's not a lead. They're not someone who we necessarily want to go full court press, because they haven't identified a need, a budget, authority, or a timeline. They haven't done any of those things. All they've said is, hey, I like your newsletter, I want to sign up for it. And so what is your thoughts on using, that, like, the different phases, I guess what I'm asking is, of like the sales funnel. So, do you bother separating contacts from prospects, from leads, marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, whatever you want to call them? But like, so, in this example, let's say somebody signs up for the newsletter, or somebody clicks on a link. Does that make them a lead, or is there more work to be done before you can sell something to them?
Yeah, there's a lot of lead. Like, this is the biggest mistake we see, where it's like, oh, they signed up for the newsletter, let's throw them into, let's start emailing them every week about everything, and and hammer away at these people. And it's always dynamic, it's always moving, but in general, you don't tend to see, suspect, prospect, lead, customer designations until you've got super tight product market fit, and you've been able to do enough sales that you actually have variables for those things. So, at a more advanced sales, or, at some place like one of the large enterprise software providers, they're going to say, okay, this person watched this video and saw these three things. We know that they're going to buy something in the next 6 months, barring something going wrong, like them losing budget or losing their job or whatever. You build that process where you can then kind of start gating things, as far as, okay, here's where people are. But if you're earlier in the cycle, then it's just a matter of, well, you've got these people coming and showing some interest, and it's a matter of just continually putting stuff in front of them. Part of it is the awareness thing too, right? It's just, you do want to keep putting things in front of you so that they know that, oh, we do this, we do that. These are the other offerings we have. But then it's also, this is just kind of straight up fishing, right? You're putting stuff out there and trying to see what people bite at and where they go. So because for us, it's all over the place, right? We have people who are interested in the newsletter that could buy a course. They do have full BANT, right, to spend $500, $750 and buy a course, but there's no way they're gonna, get a $200,000 project to build a large language model and get it live on their website. So there's all kinds of different categories and groups of buckets that you throw people into. But you just kind of have to work the pile now. And there's strategies with that too. Like, we have a great one. We actually there's a resource on our website that strengthen your LinkedIn profile for job hunting. And so that's actually a negative qualifier for us. It's great. We know that people that are looking at that, all right, they're looking to get out of wherever they are right now. So there's no point in pitching them, hey, bring us in front of your VP, because we know that they would prefer to get the hell out of there. They're not even interested in working there. So stuff like that can help you get through the pile. But it's interesting. Like, another organization that I had worked with, cybersecurity group had done a video with John Cleese. They ponied up and spent the $500,000 to get this 30-minute funny video made. And they found that it generated, 250,000 interested people a year, but it was almost not worth doing because it's like they had to get through the 499,937 of them to find the 60 people. They would have been better flying those 60 people to Napa, California for a week than to dig through that. But that's all, that's unfortunately part of the art of all this stuff, is that, everything is new and it's all human psychology. So the only way to do it is experiment and get out and play with it. But okay.
So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, other questions about setting up those mileposts and, building structure around it.
Well, it's interesting. Like, as you're describing it, it's, sales is not a new profession. It's not a new discipline. But for some reason, we keep trying to reinvent the wheel with every new digital tool or gadget or whatever. But, it strikes me as, this is, you walk into a brick and mortar store and you have somebody there saying, hey, can I help you? Can I answer any questions today? And you, as the consumer, give them that signal right away of, yes, I have questions, meaning like, I'm likely going to buy something today, or no, I'm just looking, giving the indication of like, I got this. I might buy something, I might not, but I really don't want you breathing down my neck in order to do so. And I feel like that is a really good gauge, but it's also like, you can see the person, you can sort of like understand like the body language and, the tone and the words that they're saying. And it's so simplistic because somebody walks into your store, that's sort of the equivalent, the digital equivalent of somebody signing up for the newsletter. They're interested in learning more. They may or may not buy something. And so you, as the salesperson, your job is to say, hey, I'm here. Can I answer any questions? And they either say, yeah, give me more of your stuff. I have, I'm going to raise my hand. Or they're like, no, okay, I'm just looking. And I guess the thought or the point that I'm trying to get to is that that seems like such a simple flow that I don't know why we don't use that same respectful tactic with, our digital customers. Like, okay, we've asked them, hey, can I help you? And they're like, no, I'm good. We're like, great. So here's 5,000 emails. I know you didn't ask for them, but maybe something's going to resonate. But we don't do that when we're actually, live in person with them. And the people who do get shut down pretty quickly.
Yeah. And it really comes down to just the fact that the email inbox is just kind of this slot machine, right? You just throw stuff into it. And if somebody happens to be reading, feels like reading your message today, you could have a hit. And so at these bigger orgs, they just know that, okay, we're going to send 500,000 messages and we're going to hit on 1% of them. And, that can be a business model. You can survive and make money on that. But yeah, as you get kind of to the other end of the spectrum of bigger deals and bigger sales, yeah, you don't want to have to live like that, right? That's just horrible. The idea of, doing something that bothers 100 people to get one or two to raise their hand, like that's just not. And what you find is you basically bleed humanity out of that model too. Like you don't have people doing that. You're just building processes and firing, and that's fine. But that's a different thing. That's the race to the bottom. As it goes, that's really not getting there. Yeah, one other thing too that I wanted to lay down to kick around, because we had touched on a little bit last week, and this is the first bullet, right? Separating the early customers from the mass market. This all goes to Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. He is a tech consultant and a guy who just understands how tech works. And he came up with this whole idea that tech is really interesting in the way that there's two stages to tech being bought. Any tech that comes out when it's brand new, it gets picked up by early adopters and innovators. And these are unique customers because they're willing to put up with some pain. They will install a piece of software, and if it doesn't work, they'll reinstall it. Or if it, sends out a broken email message, that's fine. They'll go back and fix it and apologize because they want to be the early adopters. They want to get there fast. And there's usually huge financial gain, right? Like if you were the first company to start using email to go after your vertical, that was a huge advantage to you over the rest of the world. And we see it with AI, right? The companies that have the guts to try and implement AI. Some of them crash and burn. Some of them are using it to their advantage and, seeing 25, 40, 50% gains because they jump on that. So that's one segment of the market. And so the whole key to your sales cycle there is you need to identify those early adopters and innovators. You have to find the crazy people. And so they have certain things that they do. They go to the events for, folks that the average public doesn't want to be bothered with. They usually hang out in Discord servers and things like that. They have places they go. But so that's pre-chasm. But then there's this drop off. So your product keeps improving, but the mass market, the people that the big, when you're showing off to VCs how you're going to hit the mass market, now 40% of the market is going to buy. Things have to be idiot proof for that segment of the market. Like, they want no headache. And in fact, on the back half of that curve are the bureaucrats at Fortune 500 companies that they don't even care if it works. They just don't want any risk, right? They don't want to be fired because they bought this thing and it doesn't work right. Or, you're stirring up trouble in the org for them. Like, that's the problem. So that's the real separation between the early customers and the mass market. The early customers are willing to put up with some craziness for competitive advantage and for early access. But if you want to access the mass market, that takes a whole different approach of the product has to be idiot proof. Literally, you can show up with like, here's what the box is. You pay this, you get this box, you can do X, Y, Z. And Oren Klaff has a whole bunch of things talking about plain vanilla. Like, those people only want plain vanilla. It's always the same. It's never different. We've done this 10 million times. It never goes wrong. We show up with the thing, you buy it. That's how it works. So that's really critical when you're looking at your sales product. Where are you in the chasm? Are the rough edges gone and are you ready for the mass market? Or are you still in this kind of Wild West where you're going to have to keep these early adopters happy? And the crazy thing in that space, usually the early adopters will become your champions. I've seen so many software companies where you get somebody in early and that person is actually doing keynotes and running your user groups and doing all this stuff. And they're thrilled to be the pioneer, but it's very different than when you're got something that the rest of the world is ready to buy.
So, you're talking about the mass market. I assume this is where you would want to start to more clearly define your ideal customer profile, because you can market to everybody, but it's probably a better bet to narrow down who exactly your customer is. And so we did this a few episodes back. If you want to catch our live stream on how we put together the ideal customer profile using generative AI, you can find it on our YouTube channel. Go to the So What playlist and the episode will be there. So let's talk about so you have your product. You've gotten the early adopters, the crazy people, as you're saying, who are willing, to take the beta version, essentially, to say, I'll help you kick the tires and make sure that it's ready for the rest of your customer base. But you still need to know who your customer base is. So how do we get to defining the ideal customer profile and then selling to them?
Yeah, and this is something that you talked about our video on that. So, in the old days, you would just grab all your customers and start doing demographic surveying, behavioral surveying, where do they have, they may not have characteristics in common, but maybe they do specific things that other people don't do. You can go by behavior. But yeah, there's kind of a whole science and surveying science to getting into your customers to figure out who they are, what they do, where they hang out. And the huge win with that is once you have an ideal customer profile, that solves a bunch of the problems we were just talking about. Like, right, okay, so you run the John Cleese campaign and get your 500,000 leads pouring in the door. Well, you can just do a database query against your CRM and say, okay, if they don't have, 5 of the 7 or whatever you have in your ICP, then we just don't even bother with them for now. We start with the people that have 7 of 7 and we start working our way down. And so it's a huge tool for your sales process because it allows you to categorize and prioritize the work because you've got limited resources. So that gets you on the mark. The interesting thing on that is we've been doing a bunch of stuff. You and Chris have put a bunch of stuff together as far as having generative AI put that together for you, having the entire internet there to scour and determine what the common factors are on people who are normally your customers is an entirely different angle and approach and set of information that's never been accessible before. I mean, even think about that. You're handcuffed by, you survey all your customers and what they're doing and what they're willing to tell you. But if you could get access to all of this stuff on the web written by people who are like those people. You're actually going beyond the customer profile, right? You've got your group that you can run the report against. And then you can say, okay, now find everybody on the web that matches this profile and tell me about that cohort. And it's just a huge advantage for finding new areas to mine. Maybe you'll find variables that you had not, were not visible in your data set, but are now accessible through the whole thing. So yeah, and that we have to just like give a blatant flat out plug too. We're looking for 2 or 3 folks to kind of do some additional testing on this stuff with us. And so if you are, yeah, there we go. Trustinsights.ai contact, come give us a yell, because our idea is to have this just as an affordable package. Like you just come in, we sign the NDA so we can get some customer data and make a profile, and then we deliver an ICP that gives you access and insight that you've never had. So yeah, that's what we're getting into the hardcore plug. But for those that have the guts and the boldness to give this a shot, it's you get the early advantage and leap over your competition with this.
Well, and I think one of the challenges, I know when I started working professionally, like I was introduced to personas, and personas are sort of how marketers and sales professionals start to break down the segments, but they're challenging. And the idea of personas in some ways is kind of antiquated because it's so general. And I remember seeing this article. I wish I could credit who put it together, but basically it was like, personas are outdated because it's like these 5 demographic points. And it was like, I think it gave like, geographic location, the UK, age, like 70 to 80, lives in a castle, has, $1 million. And you had Prince Charles and Ozzy Osbourne side by side. And they were like, these 2 people, yes, they both fit into this quote unquote persona, but they're going to have very wildly different needs and hobbies and whatever things. So basically what it was stating was that's the problem with the old way of thinking with personas. And so now, hopefully with the assistance of generative AI, but it's not a necessary tool, but hopefully what you're doing as a sales organization is going deeper into this ideal customer profile and really outlining it's not enough to just say, like it's a 24-year-old, female identifying person who lives in Massachusetts. Like that tells you nothing. You need to get into like, what are the pain points? What are the problems they're trying to solve? What keeps them up at night? What are their motivations? What are their goals? Those are the things that now in modern day sales and marketing are going to resonate, because we as consumers, we're so inundated with information 24/7. We're never not connected. We've moved well beyond the Mad Men days of, have a catchy jingle and you're going to sell 1 million units of whatever you have. Like you have to stand out and you have to hyper personalize. We as consumers expect a personalized approach every single time we open a web browser, we open a social media platform, but with the caveat that we don't want to tell you anything about us. So you as a marketer and a salesperson, you have to figure out how to get there without asking people the question. What say you, John?
Yeah, no, that's such the case. The kind of the running joke amongst stats people is that, old school personas were just layering bias upon bias, right? It was because it's one thing if they had done a bunch of customer surveys and had found some data out, but a lot of times it was just a brainstorming session of marketing execs sitting in a room and they're like, okay, Steven is our ideal customer. He's a 24-year-old skateboarder, and they just come up with these rando stories. And then, yeah, there's the cult factor of it, so now they're walking around the office. They're like, well, what would Steven think of this? Steven wouldn't like this. And so that's
I've been there. I've seen
yeah,
that.
no, we've all seen this. Anybody in the agency world or that has been part of a large, especially B2C branding, if you're making any of the conglomerates making soap or dish soap or any of those things, that's right up the alley.
How would Jennifer react to this? She's a middle-aged mom with 3 kids in school. And, she has aspirations to go back, to work at some point. But right now, she's running the household. What would Jennifer say about this dish soap?
Right. And her 2.4 children. Right. Jennifer always has 2.4 children.
Always. Yeah, I don't understand the 0.4. child, like this poor child with no limbs.
It's a partial child. So yeah, that's like the classic thing. And even generative AI can help with this, but even machine learning is part of this too, right? I mean, this is what machine learning is classic for, in identifying these unique variables. And yeah, we have it. I mean, yeah, actually, we haven't told this story in a while, but like this is a classic one for us that we had found. Chris had dug in on some data. We were doing some stuff with a client that was running a church, and there was this weird correlation in that dog owners were the right community for this. So you could go advertise against dog owners, and your odds were, significantly higher of getting better leads and qualified people, because for some reason, the people that like dogs also like to go to church in this area. And so it's that kind of stuff that's part of your profile that, yeah, you wouldn't make it up. And of course, we're seeing a ton of stuff. I don't know. It's just insane now. All this stuff going on with Google and Meta, where they're doing all this, but it's all behind the scenes. We don't get to see any of this stuff anymore. Their AI powered advertising is drawing these correlations and driving ad results, and we have no clue with what's happening behind the curtain, but that's just the way that thing works.
Well, and this is something that Chris and I were talking about earlier this week. I was asking him, with generative AI, how much data do people actually have to have on their customers? So historically, I'm sort of dividing the sales and marketing process into pre and post generative AI. So pre-generative AI, we're doing market research. We're asking people questions. We're begging them to give us any information. And then, we have this whole conversation about the cookieless future, where you can't capture that data anymore without people's permission. And people aren't willing to give up this information. And so you're stuck in, how do I know who my customers are if they're not willing to tell me? Post generative AI, customers are still not willing to tell you, but people are giving up information left and right to generative AI, whether or not they realize it. And generative AI and machine learning are putting together this synthetic data that you can access as a marketer and a salesperson and say, I don't need to talk to my customers, or my customers aren't willing to talk to me. So how can I infer all of this information through imputation, through synthetic data, and still get to the same result? And I feel like as of right now, it's underutilized, but hopefully as people start to catch on, or, as they want to, learn more about how it can work, you can get to a really deep and detailed ideal customer profile, multiple versions of your ideal customer profile, depending on, income and demographics and industries and, verticals and all the different things. But and I don't mean that it's going to replace actually talking to customers. You should still talk to your customers, but I know as a consumer, I don't want to spend my time giving up all of my interests and information to a salesperson. Like, I just don't want to, but I still want that personalized experience.
Yeah, no, this is learning for every marketing person, right? Like, because it seems to make sense. You're like, well, let's just go talk to all our customers and get all this info. And there was an early project that I'd worked on where we were trying to do this, gather this data. And we found that 80% of the customers didn't want to talk to us. They had bought the software, they were good. And the idea of the software was to make the pain go away. But the thing that was the backbreaker for me was, we were like, okay, we've done these 300, we got like 40 done. And the CEO's like, well, let me give it a shot. And they didn't even want to hear from the CEO. Like, the CEO was like, hey, I'm the CEO, we love our customers, blah, 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 blah. They wouldn't return his voice messages. They don't want to hear him. So yeah, you've nailed that. It's that you just can't get to the data in so many circumstances. And then there's a whole nother realm of, well, you think you can buy the data. You could, hey, enter this contest, enter this, get a free $20 gift card for answering these questions. Well, all those things, again, it's layering bias. There's people who are just going to game that to get the $20. They're not going to give you the truth. That's all mess. So there's a lot in there. And then I think the other thing that's just really resonated with me is that we talk about that pre-chasm thing. Chris has seen some stuff where it's been this way now, where we generate some data about a certain, thing we want to see. One model can't do it, but the latest version of this one here can. And that's just been ridiculous to see, kind of like, okay, you want to categorize these, 35 things that happened and forecast what the next 7 are going to be based on those variables. And yeah, there are models that can do that. And so
Mhm.
it's, knowing which one to pick and where to go. That's a whole, this is why Chris is on an airplane and keynoting this week and last week, because, everybody wants to hear about this stuff because
Mhm.
it's the craziest stuff going on. Yeah, he's on board with that.
Well, and, again, sort of we would be remiss if we didn't. Just a quick pitch. If you want Chris to, totally blow the minds of your team, uh, but he's staying up to date on the latest and greatest of everything that's going on in generative AI, and he's doing a lot of education. You can contact us at trustinsights.ai/contact to see how you can get Chris. Now, one of the things that, so to bring it back to sales and to bring it back to how do we find these ideal customers, or once we find them, what do we do? And so I think that's also a huge gap in understanding with modern sales is okay, so let's say I've identified my ideal customer profile. Maybe I have like 4 different versions of it depending on the situation or the product. I have my product fit. How do I pitch these people? Because there are so many bad pitches. There's one that keeps making the rounds, and I feel like it's probably the same spammy hub, but it just comes through as different emails, and it's like, "Hey, first name, last name, just kidding. I'm human too. We're all part of the matrix." Like, if you are watching this and you have gotten that spam pitch, please leave a comment so that, like, we know that we're not alone, but John and I get that one all the time.
Yeah, no, there's a bunch of horrible pitches, and this is good because we talked about the most common pitch mistake and how to avoid it. And the biggest mistake is basically that marketers are excited about their product, right? They want to pitch their product. They want to talk about, hey, this is the thing, this is what we've done, or this is what my client's doing, this is
Mhm,
why you need to be interested. And the problem is, that's higher brain functioning, right? That's the marketer talking about their product in a very calculated and understanding fashion, and putting their whole mind behind what this story is and explaining what they're doing. Well, buyers don't approach it from that way, right? They're being blindsided, right? They're not expecting to get this. And so your pitch is met with the lizard brain, right? You're crafting these pitches that 50,000 years of human evolution have put together and are writing down, and the reality is you're hitting a dinosaur. You're
mhm,
hitting the lizard brain. And there's a couple things about the lizard brain. So when the pitch gets there, one, if it's not dangerous, ignore it, right? If it's not new and exciting, ignore it. If it's complicated, uh, it goes to the fear center. It gets destroyed, and you move on.
mhm,
So you don't want anything to trip any of these alarms. And I've totally stolen all this stuff from Oren Klaff, right? This is part of his persuade win framework, and his book is just totally ridiculous. It completely blows away a bunch of stuff you'd think about how to make an effective pitch. But the short version of what he's talking about is it's definitely not about the details. If you're getting into the details of your thing, you've already lost the war, right? Because the lizard brain cannot handle the details. The lizard brain is there to like pick the details and use that as an excuse to get rid of your pitch. So the big thing is it's got to be new and exciting. It's got to be something that they want to get involved in. And then there's a whole art and bunch of things that are built around called setting the frame. Klaff talks about setting the frame. The idea is that you position what you're saying out there, and anytime an idea or a position or a frame gets out there, it will collide with the other person's frame. And these frames will always be out there, and one of them always gets destroyed. So most of the time, it's your pitch goes out via email. The person sitting at their desk says, I don't have time for this. Boom, your pitch is destroyed. It goes in the trash. So unless you can find a way to break through and get them to be interested in what that pitch is. And so the biggest weakness in all these pitches is instead of making it about the buyer, they make it about the product, but it's got to be about the buyer. The pitch is to the buyer. It's like, hey, here's why you should be interested in this. What would your day be like if I told you X? And it's actually interesting. I got to share this up even because I was digging through, and one of the things he talks about is the idea induction pattern that he has.
mhm.
He has a framework for how you can pitch something to get it to stick and buy in. And here, let me grab this because when you see this, gonna laugh because it's right on the mark. I didn't have time to throw this into a slide, but I mean, you're going to see a very familiar framework here of it's for X who are dissatisfied with Y. My idea product is a new thing that provides X, unlike my idea. And it's just, I was like, oh my God, this is like a flavor of 5 Ps. Like, this is just the
Mhm.
same thing. You're plugging in your whole product pitch and framing it from their perspective, though. So, they get an idea of who this is for. Well, it's for you. That's why I'm talking to you. And hey, do you notice that you have a problem with X? Well, our product here solves that. And
Mhm.
like even the last two, the competing products, like you don't even need to get in there if you've got something that's novel and you're in a new space. But if you are facing competition, then you would also plant those landmines right from the start. But yeah, taking some kind of framework like this, whether it's this or 5 Ps, this is the most important part of your pitch, right? You need to come up with the story for someone who knows nothing about you, is maybe going to give you 2 seconds. And then hopefully there's that whole other layer of work of you're only putting this in front of people that it's relevant to, right? You're not just
Mhm.
spamming it to the world. Because you can you're basically dialing up the hit rate the more you can focus this. If you could send this to 500,000 people, and great, you'd have that classic 2% hit rate. But if you could dial it in so you're only sending it to people that are already interested in this stuff, then you start to get into the 30-40% hit range. And kind of everything changes. Your activities get more focused, you get more leads, everything kind of gets to where it wants to be.
Well, I guess there's two things. One is, as we were just talking about, having your ideal customer profile dialed in is important so that you can do this. But what strikes me is humans in general really only pay attention when things are uncomfortable or they're bothered or they have a problem that they need to solve. Otherwise, they're like, I'm good. This doesn't apply to me. And so, the second line here is who are dissatisfied with X. And so that really goes back to your ideal customer profile has to go beyond, general demographics, but you really need to understand the pain points and the motivations. And so, you know, I'm not going to pay attention to advertisements about cheese if I have cheese, if I'm not hungry, if I'm lactose intolerant, or whatever the thing is. But the second I'm hungry, I have a problem. The second my refrigerator does not have cheese in it, I have a problem. So I'm going to be looking for a solution. And so I'd better be seeing, ads and sales pitches offering me solutions to my problem, not just you like cheese, here's some cheese. It's like, no, I know I already know this. I already know that I like cheese. You don't have to tell me. And so I'm already, to your point, like I'm out. Like the lizard brain is like, well, this doesn't apply to me because I already know that I like cheese. What's the problem? But if it's you don't have cheese in your refrigerator, you're like, I don't. That is a problem. Can you help me solve it? It's like, boom, here's your solution right here. And so I think part of where pitches go wrong is it's not clearly articulating the problem. The flip side of that is that a lot of companies that are trying to position the problem, it actually comes across as an insult. And so it's a fine line. And so I get a lot of cold pitches that are like, "Hey, I was looking at the Trust Insights website and I noticed that you're not doing the following things." That's an insult. That's not telling me that I'm dissatisfied with something or that there's a problem. You're telling me that I'm not doing my job. So you have insulted my ego and I don't want to work with you because we're already off on the wrong foot. And so the different way to approach that is to, well, number one, not to insult me. I'm the decision maker. But that's where again you have to go into your ideal customer profile. I don't have a good solution for that, but I've already stated I'm the worst on the team at writing pitches. So how would you approach that? So let's say, John, you were a, branding agency and you came across a website that desperately needed branding and you wanted to tell them that you could solve that problem. But how do you walk that line without insulting someone saying, "I see you have a problem"? I mean, I feel like I'm talking myself into they are not aware that there is a problem. So they're still not going to pay attention.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, we definitely have to hit a hammer on the big point you made, which is, yeah, they were going right to the lizard brain, right? They were like, "Hey, this is dangerous. Like, you're in trouble."
Yeah.
Any manager or bureaucratic is going to be like, "No, you're that goes away. I'm deleting that message."
Yeah.
It's just like there's a problem. I don't want to hear that. So the a common pitchcraft for that is always to start with where it could go, what it's going to happen. And
Mhm.
in fact, it usually helps if it's a bold claim. So a good, yeah, and this is called a Basho strategy. There's a whole thing on all this that we can go to. But for that specific case, the pitch would be, what if I told you that we could get you 30% more web traffic in 2 weeks based on strategies that we've used for these 3 other customers that we think will work for you? Now, that's the same thing, right? Like if you read that deep, you could say, oh, wait a minute, something's wrong with my website if I'm
Right.
not getting that. But we're not putting that. And this is where you get into the real magic of pitch stuff is hey, we have an adventure here that's going to pay off huge for you. Come with us on this trip. Let me show you why you want to go, why you want to work with us. And then
Mhm.
so that opens up this whole realm of judo of it's no longer me convincing you that we're doing something cool and that this product is good. It's you saying, oh my God, how can I jump on board on this and work with these people? And I mean, it even goes so far, when you get up into the finance world and the VC people, Claff talks about doing crazy stuff, like walking into the office and just like picking up the apple off the CEO's desk and eating it himself. Like that's the first thing he does. Because these guys are the biggest jerks on earth. And the
Right.
fact that he walks in there and says, I'm not afraid to eat your apple, that suddenly gives him the keys to talk about whatever he wants to for the next 10 minutes. And so there's a whole lot of power play and dynamic that goes into that. But yeah, it's about turning that thing around and not saying, oh my God, you're doing something wrong, you're in trouble,
Yeah.
to, hey, we've got somewhere better you can go. We can do something amazing. Come check this out. And, of course, it's taking for granted that the customer as well as they're, like I know what Katie's day is like because I've been there or I've done enough, work with similar customers so that I know that this is a legit point. I'm not sending you some point that,
Right.
you don't want to it's okay if you immediately say, oh, that's BS. If you're saying that's BS because I don't think it can be that good, but you don't want it to be that's BS because that's not possible or nobody cares
Right.
about that. Like that goes in the junk bin. So yeah, there's a lot of art to kind of making a bold claim. And again, it's you're appealing to that dinosaur brain of it's just like, hey, here's a cheeseburger. What do you think? Right? That's the
Yep.
extent of it. It's just like, yeah, you definitely want to bite of that cheeseburger. Like, tell me more. Because it's not done with the pitch. You can't just throw this big complicated explanation out there and expect somebody to bite and ask for more and learn more. It's really about framing it so that there's some benefit from there for them. It doesn't scare them. That's kind of like crash course on pitch craft there.
Well, and we only have about a minute left or so, but I just want to sort of touch upon you're giving that example of, a very aggressive approach where, I'm walking into a room of like the biggest jerks in the world, and I'm going to show them I'm an even bigger jerk by biting the apple. Do you think that that aggressive approach is still valid in modern sales?
It depends on the audience. So there's a whole set of discussion on that. It's basically called local star power, right? Is everybody has
Okay.
some star power. Now, Jeff Bezos oozing star power, right? But when he goes to take a golf lesson, when he's in that lesson, the golf pro has the power actually for that 30 minutes, right? The pro can
Mhm.
tell him what to do and how to do it and where to go. And Jeff Bezos will listen to him because he wants to become a better golfer. So there's a lot of, Claff makes a lot of his money on the fact that, you can do all this hard charging crazy stuff. And the reality is you can only use that when you're working with hard charging crazy people, which is not
Right.
95% of the market. And in fact, I would go even further and say for a lot of the stuff that we do that's all B2B, we're dealing with bureaucrats who are living in fear, right?
Mhm.
So literally nothing can be frightening. Like we do not want to scare them at any point because that they literally will just be like, oh, I'm not going to do this. But there is something to be said for still. One is gaining the star power And 2 is avoiding beta traps, because like we talked about at the beginning, going through the purchasing process, that's just a beta trap. That's somebody getting you off their desk today and making you run around on the gerbil wheel for 2 weeks before you come back with something. And that's a place where deals go to die, and so staying out of that and saying, hey, look, do you want to work with us or not? And even in the most fearsome prospects, we still use this all the time. I'm constantly sending emails of, hey, it looks like this is not going to come together. Should we just, should I just get you back in 6 months? And half the time it is, yeah, you're right, it's too busy. But the other half of the time is, no, we are serious. It's just moving slow and I can't get this through XYZ or whatever. You are back in the driver's seat as far as okay, I know where this is going and if it's going somewhere.
So I feel like we could talk about sales processes, for another couple of hours. So perhaps we'll put together, another series or a part 3. But for today, John, how do you want to wrap it up? What are your final thoughts? What are your, takeaways, or what's your last piece of Glenn Ross advice?
I know. It's always be closing. ABC, always be closing. Or if you watch Saturday Night Live, it's always be cobbling. Always be cobbling. The big thing I would love people to take away is make it about the prospect, not about you. Nobody wants to hear about super soft release 3.7.24, right? That nobody cares. So please stop sending us those emails. That's the most important thing. And I guess it's just funny that, I'm always worried about we'll get enough stuff, but we're talking about sales. So it's like the talk is infinite. It just can't be stopped. That's how it goes.
Well, the conversation doesn't have to stop here. If you want to continue to talk with myself and John about sales or anything else related or even unrelated, you can join our free Slack community at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. If you want to contact us and find out more about how you can have someone like Chris or myself or John speak to your team about any of this, or if you just have general questions, you could reach us at trustinsights.ai/contact. And I think that's going to do it for today. Until next time, John.
That sounds good. High five. Woo.
Woo. Ooh, I got it.
Yeah, we did it.
Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.